So before we get into this, first of all, everybody has some amazing bios. I was originally going to do an introduction that would have taken more than 20 minutes, but I wanted to provide a fun fact for everybody on the panel here. So who should I start with here? Gretchen and Ken, during COVID, actually took on their new quests. So Gretchen became a golfer during COVID and is now shooting below 100 and
aggravating, but fun.
Aggravating but fun, new challenge. And Ken told me that he had visited 35 states before COVID and jumped in his car to visit the other 15, so made it a perfect 50 during COVID. Let's see, Aman is a climber and climbed Half Dome, Kilimanjaro, and next year is planning to do base camp at Everest. And Justin, I saved you for last. This is very interesting. So Justin, at one point, was planning to be a priest, and then met his wife, who was his teaching assistant when he was a student, learning to play the pipe organ, and now he has 6 kids with his wife. So, go figure. So, as John said, we're talking about how to leverage health system assets to increase reach, revenue, and margin. I think all of you guys have very interesting and different perspectives. So, Ken, I wanted to start with you. So, you're running tech transfer at UPMC. So that's kind of an inside outlook, right? So you're looking at assets and how do you out-license them and get them out in the world to deliver value. So we'd love to just hear, maybe we'll start with, what are the assets right now that you're looking at that are exciting? Not specific, we'll go to a specific use case, but what are the type of assets that you're excited about leveraging?
Well, being inside out, we're looking at inventions that comes from the faculty or the staff. And so it kind of parallels what's funded for research in a way. It includes things like pharmaceutical discovery, life science technologies, medical devices, and a lot of things related to digital health and software, where we're aided by having a very large Department of Biomedical Informatics that's very interested in clinical informatics and AI and its implementation and all those related issues. So in general, those are the areas.
And you, when we were talking on the phone, you were talking about a company called RedClap that you spun out. It was super interesting. Maybe you could share a little bit of the genesis of that.
Sure. RedCap, which is an acronym for Research Electronic Data Capture, was a survey and database platform that, there's so many of those around. It's often the little things in technology that make a difference about whether people are going to adapt them, and a lot of times it meets users' needs for being easy to use and still, getting the job done. So our inventor, Paul Harris, and co-inventor, got this technology run, which still exists today, available to nonprofits, research universities around the world for free. You have to have a little software if you're not going to use the cloud platform, but a little hardware, to complement the software. But it's used currently by over 3 million users around the world in 159 countries. It's been used on all the continents. We finally got to Antarctica a few years ago. And based on that, we did look for commercialization opportunities for the things going on in the world outside of research enterprises at universities and large health systems. So we met a management team that wanted to commercialize it, that was already together with a great background. They're located in California. So we formed the company now known as RedCap Cloud. And their original mission has been to get the program available to meet the needs of the pharmaceutical industry for running clinical trials and other things, originally to be Part 11 compliant, to meet all the other regulatory requirements and the other parts of the system that aren't so important for clinical trials in academia, but are critical for the pharmaceutical industry. And since then, RedCap Cloud has also branched out into providing support and trying to meet the needs of health systems that want to share data. Since RedCap is implemented in so many places, people feel comfortable with it, and that's provided another business opportunity the company is very actively pursuing.
That's great, thank you for that. So Gretchen, Stanford obviously does a lot, and you do out-licensing and as well, but the thing that struck me that was super interesting that I think is very complementary, from your perspective as the CNIO, you work with outside companies that have innovation and you're providing them, partnering with them to provide them the expertise and the insights and the real world. How's it really going to work inside a health system? So I'd love to just hear, how do you think about the assets you're bringing to the table, you and your team? What is it that you're offering these outside innovators?
Yeah, first of all, there's amazing innovations that come out of Stanford that, help the world. And I think embedded in the atmosphere at Stanford, we sort of have a love-hate. It's this entrepreneurial spirit that's just infused in the different areas. And how we've decided to partner to really leverage outside assets is to bring in both School of Medicine researchers, entrepreneurs, outside companies, and partner with them, because really what our asset is our people, that culture, that atmosphere that everybody always works to drive improving. And that's hard to obtain, in a clinical setting, and have people feel comfortable, whether they're a resident, whether they're a frontline nurse, whether they're a revenue cycle person, and to really drive that improvement with those companies. I think you have to put some rigorous process and structure around that, so you're both, whether you're the outside entity or the inside operational group that's working on that, you're both really aligned, as we've talked today, aligned with the outcomes, aligned with the key performance indicators that you're trying to get to, and that you're not wasting those assets of your people and your time. And both entities are really coming out with a benefit.
No, it's critical insight. And I know you shared I want to hear more about the example. So it was I think it was called Rounding Software, right, the company? Yeah, can you talk about who they are? And this is a success that worked, and you took an equity stake in this company. So I'd love to hear a little bit about, how did you get introduced? Where did it come? What was the origin? And then how did you structure it? And what kind of assets that you just described were the most helpful for them being successful?
Sure. Interestingly enough, our quality department identified a problem that we're trying to solve. And the problem was a high quality indicator that really the work was done by the frontline nursing staff. So already a little bit of a divide there. But the decision was to bring in this small, new rounding company. And we were going to partner with them. And through the process, getting them into the environment, on the ground, rounding with the nurse manager, really the goal of the software was patient safety. And what came out of it months later was they had a way better UI, UE than they came into it with. They certainly had a much more robust playbook for implementation, right? They understood more broadly what Stanford needed to do, what their companies that they needed to interop with, the expectations, and how they needed to come to the table. On our side, we learned a lot about what we were expecting our teams to do. And it was a good realization that we needed to step back and holistically look at what all these operational teams are expected from an audit and rounding perspective, because this was just one slice of the pie. We ended up keeping them in our environment because we did have good outcomes for some of the safety measures, but it was just a really good double check. You think you know what's going on in your environment, but you're not clear until you're on the ground with the people.
No, it's a great example of outside in. And we're going to come back and talk a little bit about success metrics and advice a little bit later. But so inside out, outside in. I'm going to go to Justin next, which I think is a very interesting one. So a lot of innovation, obviously, at Endeavor. But you've been sharing with us this genomics program you developed, and so you're taking an asset in one area of the system and leveraging it in another area. So taking genomics and leveraging it through primary care. So I'd love to hear a little bit of the story of how that came about, and how do you think about the value to both parts of the system?
Yeah, so I would say, it's been very unique. We kind of fell into this just by trial and error. I think that, as we were thinking about our genomics program, it really was building off of actually folks like sitting in the front row here and what they did at Geisinger. I think what was different about our organization is we thought about this being a clinical problem and not necessarily a research problem, which was a different lens that I think many people took at the time. What we've been able to do, though, in very short order, we actually started with a biorepository similar to a lot of organizations, and we still use that as a validation tool for some of the products that we've developed. but very quickly developed a very robust, clinically evidence-based electronic assessment tool. Very simple. It literally started on paper, actually, and it helped us to begin to understand how you triage risk. Fast forward now, we've tested 55,000 patients as part of primary care, which is still it's like a drop in the bucket. I mean, we have 1.2 million patients, so I've said that over the next decade, we have to add a 0 to that number. I mean, it's the only way for us to really make this ubiquitous. Through that process, though, getting to the other alternative, revenue streams, we've commercialized our own pharmacogenomics test. Marketing called it MedClueRx, which I never understood, just called pharmacogenomics, but lesson learned on that one. We've also spun out a company called Genomic MD. Genomic MD is focused on bringing polygenic risk scores, and it's one of the only companies in the US now that actually can provide clinically relevant polygenic risk scores. And we have some more exciting work that we're taking a look at in the AI space now to try and understand of everything sitting in the medical record, how do you surface some of those insights to provide more clinical value? I think what's unique for us is we've never been focused on commercializing things. This is a brand new space for us, and so in the last 18 months, people like Nirav here and I have come to the table and just trying to learn, and so I appreciate being in this audience and hearing how everybody else is doing it. But we really focus on, as yesterday somebody said, the last 3 feet. We've talked about, we want to be in the last lap of the quarter mile, or the last lap of the mile, because I think that's where health systems, community-based, really have a unique opportunity. And again, we can talk more about what that means as far as downstream research opportunities, bringing clinical trials to communities. But there's a lot of excitement in our.
No, super exciting, and we're gonna have enough time to come back, and I want to dig into that. So Aman, and again, I'm looking at the different lenses. So we've got inside out, outside in, innovation from one part of the system to another. You've got a really interesting one. UPMC has done a lot. You've done a lot of investing. You've done a lot of co-creating as a system. You shared with me, though, something I thought was super interesting, and it was the first, right? The first where you've taken clinical practice and commercialized it, and then brought it out to learn, and then so you've taken it to understand the innovation, and now you've commercialized it into a.
Right. It's not the first, but it's the most recent one.
Most recent,
yeah.
but I think it's kind of an interesting one where you've.
Right.
The way I would differentiate what we're talking about is you've taken clinical practice that you're using and said, hey, we think we have some insights that are different that we can literally just turn into a company and commercialize.
Indeed, yeah. And again, one of the great assets for our health system here is our clinical practices and clinical innovation we do every day. So this one particularly relates to, you heard from pharmacy from Nick, from my colleague earlier this morning, but this one relates to surgical care. And again, it's a big book of business for any health system. And put it in context, surgical care, while we focus a lot on the what happens in the operating room, but the surgical outcomes for major surgery, they actually haven't changed since the 1970s. So still have a very high mortality rate, complication rate, readmission rates. And surgical care tends to be fairly disjointed, poor patient experience. So we created this clinical model, which actually started when I was with David at UCLA. David knows this thing, and thanks for getting us started. But didn't fully scale this thing up till I actually got up to UPMC, in part because I wanted to run it in a payer-provider system to create a model that would be both valid for a fee-for-service as well as for a payer value-based care model. And we published it, 10,000 patients or so. We showed that we actually reduced mortality by this approach by about 30% in 1 year, 2-year mortality going out. Following surgery was reduced. All the complication rates and cost of care was reduced. And the key components of this were really engaging patients in their own health before surgery, prehab, medical optimization, and care coordination. But the question was, we showed it in 10,000, which is great, but we take care of hundreds of thousands of patients every year. How do you scale that up? So that's when we actually thought, well, we actually would create a digital health platform, but instead of physicians, nurses, we actually use the digital health platform to create medical pathways and clinical pathways and actually have them implemented by health coaches. So we reduce the cost of care, yet also increase the accessibility of that model. We went into a partnership with one of our venture studios that we're invested in, and we sort of co-created this digital health platform with health coaches, with the human coaches, because patients still wanted the humans, clinicians to be involved in this, and as did our surgeons and all the clinical teams. We did a pilot. We actually published those results. With this particular model, we actually showed that for our health plan, we saved about $300 per patient per month, going out to 12 months after surgery. And of course, for the episode of care, we reduced the length of stays by a day, per episode, as well as all the other key ROIs that are important to us. So that was sort of our story behind this particular company we call PipCare. So sorry, David, we call it something different than what we embarked on, but it's been fairly successful now. We've just wrapping up our Series A on this. It was launched only about a year and a half ago, and University of Chicago and several other centers are adopting it as well.
No, it's a great success story. So with 4 minutes left, I thought what we'd do is go around 30 seconds each. We'll do 2 questions. The first is just a little bit what you were just talking about, but how do you define success in the models that you just talked about? So it can be anything.
So, it's interesting because I often joke about this, that we're fortunate that we have a very large endowment as a community hospital. So we often say we're a community, or we're an endowment with 9 hospitals now, because that's the major source of revenue. So when I think about the value metric, we've really talked about how do we position ourselves to actually become competitive regionally and nationally. And so US News and World Report, even though people can disagree with the merits behind that program ranking, that's actually being touted as one of the things that innovation and research is supposed to help us do, create the platform for podiums, publications, and all those things to get our clinicians known in the industry.
Very interesting.
Helps that we changed our name during the middle of all this, so we've taken a couple steps back, but hopefully we'll catapult forward.
That's great. Thanks for sharing.
When it comes to KPIs, when you're bringing this any innovation forward, I would be remiss as a health enterprise to say you dust off your strategic plan, you set your key priorities. Like that is your North Star that we try to track back on all this work too. And that's an expectation as we sort of productize, as we bring these things in. It's a good reminder what we're all here to do. It helps us utilize our resources a little bit more efficiently. Not every innovative idea moves forward either. And I think that's a way to more, operationally and agnostically score them.
Great. Thank you, Gretchen. Ken?
Impact is what we're ultimately after. It's difficult to measure, so we have a lot of other things we do measure. It's a very hits-driven industry like books or music in technology transfer because the technologies are also early and usually require a good bit of additional investment. Digital health is maybe a little bit better than some of the other areas like biotech, but yeah, we look at revenues and patents and all those kind of things. But ultimately, we like to talk about the impact and kind of our success stories there.
That's great. And Aman?
I think defining a priority, what those key metrics would be, what the value is for the health plan, what is to our provider side, I think that was really helpful in terms of being able to scale it up within the system itself. And we are pretty rigorous in terms of applying the same standards of things that we develop internally as well as any technology solutions we bring from outside.
Great. And the last question, we'll do lightning round. One piece of advice for the audience on how to leverage assets for reach, revenue, and margin. Start with Ken.
Entrepreneurship is a team sport, so is technology commercialization. Make all the connections and networks you can, and we're glad to be here in part for that reason.
Great. Aman?
I think getting the finance team involved very early on and being able to educate why it's important to do this thing is important.
Excellent. Justin?
So I would say it doesn't have to be the unexpected. Sometimes it can be the expected.
Interesting. And Gretchen, last word.
Influencers are needed, and don't be afraid to say the obvious, because that's what people are looking for you to do.
Awesome. Well, first of all, thank you guys. Great panel, asset-rich experts up here. Thank you guys. It was wonderful. Thank you. It was great.